Yeah, he said what gives me hope, and I don't know that I feel hopeful every day. That it's hard to be hopeful when there's this constant escalation of impacts and hottest ever temperatures, and results in the droughts, the floods, the extreme weather around the world. But if you keep chipping away, something will change.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Equals, the fabulous podcast about inequality. This is Max.
Hello everyone, this is Naf. Welcome to Equals.
And great to be back on the air with you, Naf. I just listened to your interview with the Brazilian multimillionaire. What a cool guy.
Agreed, Max. Such a great interview. I found it really positive and uplifting. And, I really love it when rich people call for the right things, such as, taxing wealth, and also that there needs to be a limit to wealth.
Yeah, no, definitely. Have a listen to that one, everyone. It will leave you feeling very positive, and that's a valuable thing in these days. So we're into November. We're shifting gear a bit again. Last month was all about kind of limits to wealth and, those kinds of issues. This month it's all about climate and the relationship between climate and inequality, which is, of course, Naf, your day job. And climate has been all over the news, hasn't it? Not least with that hideous hurricane in the Caribbean.
I know, Max. Really, really shocking, to see all the damage. Jamaica, they're calling it a storm in a century. And we're seeing all these extreme weather events getting worse and worse. And what really concerns me, Max, is we're at 1.3 degrees of warming, and we're also being told that 2024 was the hottest year, and this is going to be a commonplace. So we're going to see these extreme weather events getting more frequent and getting more intense.
Definitely. And that was really my stepfather. He used to be in the police, and he's got a friend who is Jamaican. He's retired in Jamaica, and he was, saying how he was. And he said that one of the problems in Jamaica is people won't go to the shelters because they're worried that their houses will get robbed. And then I was also reading about the incredible evacuation in Cuba. And we did look at this, if you remember, in our climate equality report a couple of years ago, that this really good suggestion from our team in Oxfam, Mexico, their campaign slogan was, "There is no such thing as a natural disaster." You have natural weather events, and it's society that decides whether it's a disaster or not, the way that society is organized, and very much the equality of that society. So the Cubans have got a world-renowned system of kind of early warning and evacuation, and their crime levels are very low, so people are not worried about leaving their property, so they'll move away from the coastline. And as a result, if a hurricane hits, it still causes a lot of property damage, but very, very few people lose their lives. And contrast that with Jamaica, where you've got very, very high inequality, very high levels of crime, and a very different society. Or even Haiti, where we've got virtually no governance at all. And the same storm, the same strength of storm, can have a dramatically different impact, can't it? So, I feel really, really feeling for all those people in the Caribbean at the moment.
It's a really important story to tell, Max, meaning, at the end of the day, at the heart of the climate crisis lies huge inequality and injustice. It's not just an environmental crisis. And, on the same note, I'm really excited actually because we launched our climate inequality report, which shows the disproportionate emissions of the richest and, ultimately how the poorest people are the ones paying the highest price. But, our report this year is especially important because it's also coming at the back of the UN NDC synthesis report, which looks at the climate plans of countries. So the UN report is saying that the world is off track in terms of reducing emissions and in terms of limiting global warming. So our report is really relevant because we're talking about since the Paris Agreement. Imagine, Max, the richest 1% of people have burned through more than twice as much of their remaining carbon budget as the poorest half of humanity combined. And this story is really important because we are running out of carbon budget, and this budget is really important in terms of ensuring that we have the opportunity to address both the climate crisis and the inequality crisis.
Yeah, and I like the image of the carbon budget. Imagine you only had like $100 left in the world, and you gave 95 of it to some rich guy to spend on caviar. I mean, that's effectively what we're doing with carbon at the moment, and it's a scandal. There's so much we could do to reduce the emissions of the richest, which would buy us a bit more time as well, wouldn't it? So really powerful. And to today's episode, all the episodes this month, both of them are about climate change as well, but slightly different tack to these reports. The interview today is with a climate activist from the UK, and again, it's another very positive one, actually, isn't it? It's about an amazing campaign victory here in the UK, isn't it?
Definitely, Max. This is a story that everyone, working on climate action, or for that matter, working for social justice, would feel inspired to hear.
Yes, it's a lady called Sarah Finch. She's a climate activist from the UK. And it's a great interview. Should we get into it?
Let's dive in.
Cool.
Sarah, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for making the time to join us on Equals. So, to begin, for listeners who may not know, could you explain what your landmark legal victory in the Supreme Court last year was about?
Yes, it was a case I brought against planning permission which had been given for oil production at a small site called Horse Hill, near where I live in the southeast of England. The council had given permission for 20 years of oil production from 6 oil wells at this site, and they'd done so without giving any consideration to the climate impact of actually burning all that oil they were going to produce at Horse Hill. On behalf of a group called the Wheeled Action Group, I brought a case and we simply argued that it was illegal for them to have done this because in UK law, which is based on European law, all developments over a certain threshold are required to go through a process of environmental impact assessment. And the law says this should cover all the likely significant direct and indirect impacts of the development on the environment, including the climate. So we argued that the emissions from burning the oil were indirect impacts of producing that oil, and so they should have been assessed. And it was a very simple question. And in the end, after a 5-year legal battle, we won. So that was a big win. And it basically means now, from now on, any new fossil fuel production or indeed any high carbon development, when decisions being made about whether to permit it, they have to look at the climate impact, of the end product and not just the production process itself.
Which is a massive thing. And we'll definitely get into the wider ramifications in a minute. But let's start a bit more with your story then. So why was it you, Sarah, involved in this? Where did this all start? And what motivated you?
It started long before the legal case, definitely. I've always been interested in the environment from childhood and, then the climate. And so I'd been campaigning, when I saw opportunities, for environmental and climate action. But then in the 2010s, I sort of found myself living in the middle of an oil rush. In the southeast of England, there's always been some onshore oil and gas production, of small sites like a nodding donkey in a field here and there. But in the 2010s, new techniques like fracking that had become available made it potentially feasible to extract, hard to reach oil deposits. And there was a whole rush of applications from oil companies who wanted to drill wells right across the region. And Horse Hill was just one of those. And so individuals and communities came together. We formed this network called the Wheeled Action Group to share our knowledge and experience. And we fought these applications and we had some successes, but at Horse Hill, we just didn't. From 2012 onwards, they got permission for 2 test wells for test drilling. And we tried every tactic campaigning against these. There was a lot of direct action, people protesting at the site, slow walking lorries, locking on at the gate, all that kind of thing. Nothing worked. And so in the end, when they came through with this application for 20 years of full production, that's when we thought the legal challenge was the only sort of tool left. It was a last resort, really.
Sarah, as you said, this wasn't a solo effort, right? How were you able to mobilize support? Who were some of the key individuals or groups that joined you in this fight? And what role did they play in supporting the legal challenge?
Yeah, it wasn't at all a solo effort. So I brought the case on behalf of the Wheeled Action Group. And that was because our lawyers recommended that it would be better to have an individual to front the case rather than an organisation. And I volunteered to do that. But the Wheeled Action Group were there from the start. and did all kinds of things. But a key part of it was fundraising. So using the law is expensive. Our first fundraising target for legal fees was £35,000. That felt like a huge amount for a small group to raise. And then when we had to go to the Court of Appeal, that was another £30,000. But the Wheeled Action Group really stepped up. So people organised all kinds of initiatives. A 71-year-old woman did a 100-mile sponsored walk. She raised £5,000. Like 2 young men cycled 1,000 miles. Or people from the Wheeled Action Group all did whatever they could. And in the end, it proved not hard to raise that money. But then we also had a lot of support from local residents, the parish council, local organisations, Friends of the Earth, the national organisation. They joined the case as legal intervener, which meant their lawyers were also sort of writing submissions to the courts. But they helped us in other ways too, with things like media work. And of course, the lawyers were incredible, really made our case very strongly. So there were a lot of people involved in that case.
I'm going to ask you about the cases in a minute, but can I just go back a second and ask about your involvement in the direct action? So tell us, just maybe tell us a little bit more like that. So did you chain yourselves to the oil derricks? Did you get arrested? What kinds of exciting things did that involve?
Yeah, lots of people did those things. So just to put it into context, there was a big fight against fracking in the UK at that time. And that centred on sort of Lancashire in the northwest and then the Weald area in the southeast. So in both of those cases, there was a lot of direct action. So slow walking lorries was one of the key methods. That means when the big tankers are going in and out, or they're bringing the drill rigs to the sites, etc., these big vehicles, people step out into the road and they don't actually stop the lorries from moving. So long as they're allowed to keep moving, that's not illegal, but they just walk slowly. So a group of people will just walk slowly in front of a lorry to sort of prevent it from doing what it's come to do. But there was lots of cases of people locking themselves across gates, occupying sites, just anything to stop that work going ahead as a very physical demonstration that this is not acceptable. You do not have the community's consent to be operating here. So there was a lot of that at Horse Hill, and a lot of people did get arrested, yeah. And in fact, the oil company took out an injunction to stop, any kind of protest anywhere near that or any of their other sites or their head office. It was a very sort of extreme injunction, which the Wheeled Action Group tackled that in court as well and got that injunction stepped back and reduced in its scope. I personally wasn't part of that, but that was the Wheeled Action Group's kind of first taste of using the law, and in that case to kind of protect our right to protest.
And how about you, Sarah? Have you ever been arrested doing this kind of thing?
No, I was a very backroom campaigner. I did take part in slow walking, but nothing. I never took part in anything beyond that. I was always somebody who was, sitting at my kitchen table reading through the planning applications, and that's my sort of personal form of activism. But obviously completely supported those taking direct action.
And that's a huge achievement. The Finch ruling is now considered a landmark decision, right? What exactly did the Supreme Court's ruling establish? And why is it so significant for how future fossil fuel projects in the UK are approved?
They were generally the small sites that were a little bit out of sight. But so in the case of Horse Hill, the nearest sort of big settlement is probably about 1 kilometre away. But there are a few houses nearer than that. And so another site, Balcombe, that was close to Horse Hill and sort of part of the same kind of rash of applications, that was just within a mile of a village, downhill from a village, so that the flare stack on that site, the air would have gone straight at the level of people's houses. So yeah, there was a lot of concern about the local impacts, the local air pollution, the noise, 24-hour light, the heavy tanker traffic, etc. And people objected, including me and others, on all of those grounds. But when it came to the challenging the Horse Hill decision legally, we sort of talked to lawyers and we looked at it and we thought that the climate impact and the particular point about failure to assess indirect emissions was the most likely to win, in a court of law.
And also the most dramatic in terms of its implications. I mean, just as an aside, I used to go to the Balcombe disco when I was a teenager.
Did you?
Yes, because I grew up near there. So I can assure you, Naf, not only is it a very twee part of England, it's one of the most densely populated, and it's full of lots of beautiful countryside. suppose let's get into the challenges in the courts then. So you had to go through so many different levels of court, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and then even up to the Supreme Court. What was the outcome? How did you keep going? What were the biggest challenges in doing that?
It was really long. And I have to say, when I sort of started it, I imagined it would all be over in 6 months. Not at all. It ended up taking 5 years. So yeah, we got knocked back at every stage. So our application for a judicial review was refused twice. And then we went to the Court of Appeal just to get permission to have a judicial review, which we did. And then when we finally had our hearing in the High Court, we lost there. So the judge said that the greenhouse gas emissions from the combustion of the oil were not an effect of producing the oil, but he also said it would be actually impossible for the council to assess them. And that was clearly wrong. I mean, there's actual sort of agreed methodologies for assessing greenhouse gas emissions, and, industry has to do it in other contexts. So we couldn't accept that. So we then applied to the Court of Appeal, and we had a hearing there, and we lost again, but not unanimously. So there were 3 judges in the Court of Appeal, and one of them agreed with us, and one of them who didn't agree with us, it was, only just. He said that he thought the council's arguments just about passed muster. So it wasn't a strong judgment. And also it was better than the High Court one in that they didn't say it would be impossible to assess the downstream emissions. They said it would be up to the decision maker in each case to decide whether to do that. And we thought that was just bad law. It was leaving it up to different decision makers what to do. So that would lead to different decisions being made in very similar cases, or very unsatisfactory. So we then applied to the highest court, which is the Supreme Court, to hear the case again, which would be our last effort. And that wasn't an easy decision because we thought, well, the Supreme Court might just sort of take us back to the High Court judgment, which was worse. And by this time, other fossil fuel applications had been approved and kind of based on my judgment in the High Court. So a particular bad day for me in this whole thing was when our then Environment Minister, Michael Gove, approved the first new coal mine in the UK for decades. And in his judgment, he said, well, as we've heard from the Horse Hill case, we don't have to assess the downstream emissions. We don't have to look at the impacts of burning all of this coal. So I felt kind of responsible for that. And I did fear that if we went to the Supreme Court and lost there, that's setting a very, very bad precedent. But in the end, we did go to the Supreme Court and we won.
So the stakes were high because in both directions, because it set a major precedent, which could have been bad. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, well, it did set a precedent that was bad, and then luckily that got overturned, and now it's set a precedent which has been really good and had sort of wide-ranging impacts.
So, Sarah, what I really find interesting about this case is when oil is being dug out, it should stop right there, in terms of how bad it is for the environment and for people. But in your case, you were also arguing in terms of the end use, that it's having a huge impact on our climate. But shouldn't they actually, we don't even need to argue that far. From the get-go, from the start, oil should not be dug out. We can argue that case and just shut it down, no?
Oh, well, totally. That case has been well made. The International Energy Agency, the United Nations, but people have said we can't afford to produce any new oil or gas if we're going to keep within climate targets. But there's a sort of a big gap between that knowledge and UK planning law. And that was something that I hope that my ruling has gone some way to plug, because now they can no longer approve those kind of developments without even considering the climate impact.
Yeah. So, Sarah, the Finch ruling is now considered a landmark decision, yeah? What exactly did the Supreme Court's ruling establish, and why is it so significant for how future fossil fuel projects in the UK are approved? I know you already actually mentioned something.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it set out clearly how to assess whether something is an effect of something else. So in this case, why the effects of burning oil are effects of getting that oil out of the ground. But it has a wider application than that as well. And it also reinforced that environmental impact assessment must cover all the likely impacts of a development. And it also really championed environmental impact assessment as an important part of the democratic process. Like, it's not just a sort of procedure that they have to go through. It's vital that when decisions are made, all stakeholders have access to the full information so they're able to participate. So it was a very good reminder of the importance of environmental impact assessment, and it has been a total game changer in the UK. So Horse Hill was really relatively a small thing in the scheme of things, but much bigger developments have now had their planning permission quashed. They've been found unlawful as a result of the ruling on my case. So that includes the Cumbrian coal mine.
That same coal mine that Michael Gove.
Yeah.
Was that a good day?
That was a really good day. But also very large oil and gas fields in the North Sea, many times bigger than Horse Hill. So the Rosebank oil fields were the most famous one. They had been approved by the previous government. There were legal challenges against those by environmental groups, and they were also found unlawful, and they've had their planning permission squashed. So in the case of Rosebank and Jackdaw, those oil companies will apply again, but the decision will have to be made again sort of from scratch, looking at the full impacts. But it's also had effect beyond oil and gas. So, for example, in intensive farming, in April, a huge intensive livestock facility in Norfolk that would have seen tens of thousands of pigs, literally, and millions of chickens, literally, over a year. That was refused planning permission, citing the Supreme Court ruling in my case. So in that case, the indirect effects that the applicant had ignored were the deforestation involved in growing the soy that the animals would be fed on, and then the manure and other pollution from the farm. So that is huge too.
Wow, so the deforestation elsewhere in the world, grow the soy to feed the livestock.
Yeah, so that's an upstream impact. That's something that's going to happen before, this development can take place. But then also the pollution, the environmental pollution from disposing of all the, the manure and all the nitrates, etc., from the farm. So is actually huge. But an environmental impact assessment is only one part of making a decision, and it doesn't mean that things can't be approved if they have big impacts. It just means they have to be considered. So it's a huge step forward, but we always have to keep on our guard and keep making the case that approving any new kind of high carbon schemes is, unacceptable in a climate emergency.
It must exercise a kind of almost like a chilling effect to some extent, mustn't it? Because it just makes it more of a bother and harder work to get one of these things approved. So maybe...
Yeah, I hope so. But, there are voices in the government and beyond that question the need for climate action and also kind of push the so-called economic benefits of oil and gas. Those arguments are easy to rebut, but they are still being made. So we have to still keep on making the case.
That's an incredible achievement, Sarah. I know this case is happening in the UK, but have you been working with others across the world, like with other movements, or maybe the Wild network itself is connected with others in different parts of the world?
Yeah, not very much. I'm very, very aware that all over the world people are fighting fossil fuels, and I'm also very conscious of my privilege in having been able to bring this case. That in the UK we do have access to the law, and I know that climate defenders are having a much harder time in some places, but I haven't had a lot of direct contact. The one case that we did have some contact with was in Mozambique, where the UK government had, in 2020, they pledged, I think, $1.15 billion of UK export finance to an offshore liquid natural gas project. And that was a terrible project that had fueled conflict and human rights abuses. Hundreds of thousands of people displaced, people had been murdered by security forces. The project also obviously would speed up climate breakdown. It would have been a disaster for the, beautiful coastline. I think it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site on that coastline. So very, very bad project all round. And the UK government were pledging to fund it. And Friends of the Earth got involved in taking that decision to court. Unfortunately, they lost that case, and it's still ongoing. So we did have some contact with those campaigners in Mozambique. They sent us a solidarity message, which we read out at a rally, and we got all of our members in the Wield Action Group to write to our MPs, asking them to tell the government not to fund this project. And in fact, I think it's still on the cards, but the government is clearly concerned about the human rights violations and has commissioned an independent review of this. So I do hope that it will not go ahead.
It's clearly that your work, the legal work, the work of the Wheeled Action Group has had a big kind of impact beyond what you possibly imagined, in fact. And it's brilliant. You could probably just, relax now, but I'm sure you're not. So what's next for you in your advocacy work? What's giving you hope at the moment?
I'm still very much focused on this case and making sure that this judgment has a result that it should have, and it seems to be having. But, for example, the UK government will have to remake decisions on those Rosebank and Jackdaw oil developments. So it's not a done deal yet. There's an outside chance that they could approve them again. So I'm working very hard to make sure that it's a sort of political hot potato in the UK, along with others. So just for that. Yeah, he said what gives me hope. And I don't know that I feel hopeful every day. That it's hard to be hopeful when there's this constant escalation of impacts and, hottest ever temperatures. And we see the results in the droughts, the floods, the extreme weather around the world. But I think it's really shown me that individual people can make a difference, and even a big difference. And it's never certain what the result's going to be. And more campaigns are unsuccessful than are successful. But if you keep chipping away, something will change. And I do even hope that this ruling is a tipping point in the UK. When, we're familiar with the concept of tipping points in climate, where something changes and suddenly everything gets worse faster in an unpredictable way. But I hope that this is a tipping point in the other direction that's going to make sort of things get better.
Oh, that's a great thought. Kind of hopeful tipping points. I like that.
Yeah, I really love that. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover that we haven't?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just some people sort of ask me about advice about legal cases. And I think what I would just always say is don't focus on legal cases. Just do whatever you can. You never know what's going to work. And in my case, it was a legal case. But in other, even in other cases that the Wheeled Action Group were involved in, we've defeated oil sites in other ways. So try everything and persevere. And the most important lesson, I think, from my experience, is make sure you're surrounded by good people. Don't try and do anything on your own.
That's really good advice. That the legal option is a powerful one, but it's not the only one. And
it's expensive, it's slow, and the results aren't guaranteed. And sometimes by creative thinking and clever campaigning, you can win in another way.
Are you worried about the kind of crackdown on protest generally and the implications that has for the climate movement in terms of options of things that are on the table?
Yeah, I think it's terrible what's happening in the UK right now. Not just in climate, people campaigning on Palestine, people are being arrested for carrying a placard with a very simple and obvious statement on it. I do feel that we're in a very bad time for protest.
Yeah, I think that's true. And at those times, I think these legal options become more powerful and more important, don't they, as well?
I think so, yeah.
That was really, really lovely interview. Nice chatting.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem, Sarah. It's a great story. It's a real David and Goliath story, and I think people love that, And I think you're right what you said about the kind of the privilege of being in the UK and not facing some of the more hideous risks that are faced by environmental defenders elsewhere. But that doesn't mean this story isn't hopeful for many people around the world. So it's great to be able to tell it.
I really love that. Thank you so much, Sarah. I find your story, your action truly inspiring and uplifting.
Nice chatting to you. Have a lovely day. Wow, what an inspiring interview. I really enjoyed that.
I really love that story, Max. It gives me hope because, it makes me realize how when communities mobilize, they can fight against big machines and win, as Sarah has shown us how they won against the fossil fuel industry. And I'm sure, Sarah will likely describe herself as an ordinary citizen, but she and her community have achieved extraordinary actions. So that's why I really find the story inspiring and hopeful.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. Now, yeah, she really could be anyone, and yet did these amazing things. I think the other thing, if I'm honest, I'm a little bit skeptical of using the law to campaign. I always think the law is basically written for the rich and the powerful, but I think that's not always true. And I think her story is really clear that at times and in the right places, legal challenges and using the power of the courts can be an incredible way to achieve victory. And I think that was a lesson for me. I remember these debates with other colleagues in Oxfam, and things like the right to education movement in India that used the constitution and legal challenges really successfully. And yeah, I think that use of the law to campaigning was a big takeaway for me as well.
Exactly, Max. This hasn't been an easy journey for Sarah or any of the members of the Wild Action Group. They have said, this has been a struggle, but they persisted, and it resulted in something that will have huge ramifications at the UK level, but also at the international level. So that's what I loved about the whole story.
Yeah, so that was a great activist interview. And in fact, our next climate podcast is with another climate activist, isn't it?
Yes, we're really excited. We're going to be interviewing Marinel Ubaldo, a youth climate activist from the Philippines.
Yeah, she sounds amazing. I haven't met her myself, but I know we've been working with her on our Make Rich Polluters Pay campaign, and I'm sure it'll be another inspiring interview. And yeah, I just think it's great to hear about people fighting back and trying to stop climate change, isn't it?
Yes, and this month episode, what we really want to make sure is, the climate crisis is not just, telling stories, negative stories, but we really want to inspire people that there are a lot of activists out there doing amazing action. So we really want to give a lot of positivity and hope to people.
Indeed. Podcast is equals hope, isn't it? So lots of hope this month. So listen in to the next episode, everyone. Please recommend Equals to your friends, family, put it on your list of favourites, and we will talk to you all next time.
Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.
Bye, everyone.